Partners for Diversity Alliance, but also in the inclusivity calendar, as it were, is about honouring men. And I was particularly touched by this particular subject matter and the fact that we are focusing on this, because I've worked quite a lot with, or been approached quite often by, white male leaders or men in general around how they can engage with EDI, number one, but also reaching out to say that they sometimes feel unheard, sometimes attacked, and that they have to always put on this kind of front of strength when actually sometimes they need to be vulnerable too. And I found that really interesting, and I feel like it's about time that we did hear from the men of our industry and the men in the business world to talk about what we can do to support each other, how women can support men, how men can support men, and actually what is going on like in men's heads, because also I'm a woman, I don't know. I'm also not that bothered, but
at least you're honest there, Gabby.
I'm interested in this sort of like capacity, but definitely not in a dating one. I'm like, you crack on, pal. Whatever. Just to clarify that. So got a wide range of really interesting guests, and I've known you for a number of years, worked with you for a number of years. You were actually there at the beginning of my events career, actually. And
I remember that well. God, that was
such a warm, bubbly person.
God, that was an egg, wasn't it? If I remember correctly. Yeah, God, many moons ago.
Yeah, I just remember you like really easy to get on with.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah, and just enjoyed your company, and so I thought you'd be a great. Oh, thank you. And I thought you'd be a great guest on this, because from a different perspective, the background that you have that we're going to delve into a little bit more, and actually experiences that you've had in our communities, the education system, and also in the professional world. So why don't we kind of jump back to an earlier conversation that we had actually, which was, and I loved this because it's true, that when you see those questionnaires or those surveys with ethnicity boxes, you're like, I don't know which box to tick. I don't know how many boxes to tick.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
And it continuously changes, doesn't it? I mean, I remember, from a very young age when you had to fill out like your UCAS form or something like that. And it asks you, your ethnicity background. And being Asian, there wasn't really, I always classify myself as being British, because I was born in Britain. But then, to see me, it's like, well, what's your ethnic background? Okay, so my ethnic background is from where my parents come from, naturally. And so you've got Asian, and then you've got, but Asian also is that there wasn't really a box for Far East countries. They had China, they had Japan, but what about all the other countries that are surrounding there? And then under was other, and then there's other, please specify. And I thought, well, okay, Filipino then. But then why? And then the next form changed again, and it was all different, tick boxes. And I'm like thinking, God, it literally is kind of like you're putting everybody into labels again. And but this is society, and this is how we kind of, unfortunately put silos up by labeling people.
How challenging for you growing up and even now has just identifying, I'm going to say something silly here, identifying and describing your identity? Yeah, that did make sense. What impact has that had, if any?
It was challenging sometimes. I mean, coming from the second generation Filipinos that came over, and when I was growing up, there was not much known about Filipinos. My parents came over at the height of when there was a need for nurses, and it was.
That's a familiar story now. Very familiar story, isn't it?
Even now, it is happening again, where the floodgates are. We require more nurses. But there was a big surge of Filipino migrants back in the 70s, of people coming over from the Philippines, because a lot of them were trained as nurses in the Philippines, because it was one of the very big occupations that a lot of adults did back then. And I was kind of almost put in that sector that your parents were nurses naturally,
Right.
but also cleaners as well.
Mm.
And that kind of really hit a nerve with me one time when I was very young, and I went, and I was lucky enough to go to a private school because my parents worked silly hours to
Yeah.
put me through private school. And I remember vividly this boy in my class who was very wealthy, lived on the road next to Millionaires Road, which is known as Bishop's Avenue in
I know
North
Bishop, I used to live
London.
Bishop's Avenue,
Yeah.
walking down there going, it's George
Yeah.
Michael's house.
I mean, the
Never be able
houses
to
there
afford
are
a house here.
fantastic. But out in the playground, when we were all playing, nothing to do with what he said next. He just turned around and said, I saw your mum this morning. She was cleaning my room.
Yeah.
Oh, that kind of really, as a child, I then felt really, really small. And it's still to this day echoes in the back of my head. But why did you need to say that? What benefit was it? And yes, it can be excuses, we were kids and you don't know those barriers quite yet. But I remember me myself so young feeling like I don't belong here because I've got going to school with parents who were lawyers, solicitors, had their own firms, people who had huge businesses, who had second homes in like Saint Tropez and going on luxury holidays. And there's little, sorry,
Go on.
and then there's little me just with my parents who, was a nurse. Both of them were nurses to begin with during the day, and then had to do part-time work and clean houses after their main job to just kind of help us get through. So
Thank you for sharing that. I've got a question for you. How do you think that experience then went on to shape your experience through the rest of your school years, do you think?
I felt very much that I had to prove myself, that I did belong, and I had to become the tough guy in the school, the guy that everybody wanted to be in Lowell's gang.
Right.
The guy who at parties, it's not a party unless Lowell gets there, because that was my mask. That was my mask to kind of shield myself. And when my friends would come over and stay, we lived in North London, and my parents still do live in North London in the Haringey Ladder. It was, not even a quarter the size of some of the houses that my friends would, when I went to stay at their houses. And in some ways at the start, I was a little bit embarrassed about it because, oh God, as you as a child, you think like, why don't I have a big house? Why are my parents not, and later on, obviously in life, you realize, you know what, those things don't matter. Because later on, as I grew up, my confidence started to grow, and I found that my classmates enjoyed coming around to my house more than me going around to them, because it was again something different for them. They were in the real world as such, they experience things that they never experience, like sharing a room with your brother, for example, or why does your aunties live with you as well? And I lived with two aunts as well in that house, and and it was
It's so interesting.
yeah.
It really is. I was thinking back to a time, I remember I went round to a friend's house after school one day, and they were quite well off, not hugely, but they had a nice big Victorian house, and one room did have like a pool table and a pinball machine, I remember, and I was obsessed with going on this pinball machine. And I must have been about 9, but back in those days, like you could walk around by yourself, like you walked to school by yourself, like we did walk to school by ourselves, and go out by ourselves in the neighborhood, as long as you kind of got back before it was dark, was usually the saying. And I went round to my friend's house, and I don't know how, I lived with my grandmother at the time, and I don't know how my grandmother found out I was around my friend's house, but she came round to knock for me and collect me. And my grandmother actually suffered from schizophrenia, so wasn't great necessarily at looking after herself, and obviously clearly had mental health issues. And I just remember the shame I felt when she came to the door. And now I look back and I feel awful because I have a better understanding of what her experience was.
Absolutely.
As a kid, you don't get it, do you?
You don't.
I don't want to be different. I don't want to be different to everyone else, or for people to think I'm less than. So I had that shame, which now I'm ashamed of having that shame.
But I so can relate to that. I mean, believe it or not, but I hated my name when I was young because it's an unfamiliar name, Lowell. Who else do you know that has got a name like Lowell? And in my head, I was like, why couldn't they just name me like a simple name like John, like David, or a simple British name? Why do you have to be so different? But now, as you get older, you realize, do you know what, that those differences is what makes me, you know, me having my exotic name now that people tell us, oh, that's a really nice name, you know, and I'm like, do you know what, it is a really nice name. And I'm now thinking, thank you, Mum and Dad, for naming me. But as a child, you just don't, you're so pressurized to try and fit into everything that's around you. And it's difficult, I know, with kids, and the pressure that's put on kids nowadays with social media and things they see on TV. They have to fit in, and to be different is something that's frowned. But no, it's not. You know, we've got to start at I think, you know, at the childhood stage to teach kids that, you know, diversity is good, you know, inclusion is good. Not when people are universities, and because that's what a lot of companies do. They go into universities and do it at that level. I think it needs to start far earlier than that.
It does, but you know what? I feel like it needs to start with educating the parents, though, because at the end of the day, as a kid, you pick up on what you hear the adults say, you pick up on surroundings, you pick up on facial expressions and body language when you see their reaction to something on the TV or a piece of news. And that's the stuff we pick up on as children that I think parents don't realise. So actually, I kind of almost think that, until, no offence, but until the next generation have gone, there's still going to be a little bit of that, because I feel like millennials are a bit more, particularly younger millennials, are a bit more flexible on this. Gen Y, Gen Z are definitely much more all over this. And I feel like being a bit different now is encouraged and celebrated, and actually people stick up, like I see younger people stick up for each other a lot more around their sexuality, around their gender. I think
I agree so much. I think the whole allyship is so much more seen with you know, the millennials now, because they kind of a bit more accepting of each other, whereas I know back then you were put in a silo, you were put in a, you know, in a box, and that's how people are meant to perceive you, because you're that type of person, or you're that color, or you're that religion, or you know, and unfortunately we are, you know, taught to judge people, and it's something that we need to try and unteach. You know, when you see someone walk down the street, you immediately have this perception of what they're going to be like, or what they're going to say, or what even their religion is sometimes. But you know, when you start speaking to them, you actually realize they're nothing like what you thought they were going to be, that they are probably more like you in many ways.
Exactly. I agree. And I think one thing I would like sort of unpick there a little bit is that it's quite normal for us to make a prejudgment on somebody based on, you know, just looking at them or hearing their voice. It was evolutionary, right? We did it to protect ourselves so we could stay alive. So that unconscious thinking, and I'm not saying unconscious bias, I'm just talking about that unconscious thinking or analysing, it just happens naturally through evolution.
It does.
The key is, whether that's chosen family, whether that is family that we're born with or grew up with, men's health is important. It's a crucial element of that family unit, whatever that looks like, right? Because we have wives, brothers, partners, sisters, nieces, nephews, and actually a man's health and how that impacts them can actually impact that family unit, or even that friendship circle, or even that work environment.
Yeah.
So what I would want to know is, like, is there an experience that you've had, or conversations that you've had with loved ones about mental health challenges or difficulties? Yeah, any conversations that you've had, or is that something that perhaps being, second generation or first generation, sorry, you British born, that's something that's not addressed with, parents who weren't born in the UK? I'd like to know either way.
I think it is very much more of the latter of what you said. You're and being, second generation. I'm a person who wears my heart on my sleeve. I'll tell you how I feel. I'm the type of person who bloody cries at EastEnders when there's a sad moment, but from, my parents' generation was very different. Emotions weren't really shown as such. If you were upset, you never really were, not necessarily allowed to, but it wasn't kind of accepted that you were feeling sad, or I don't like myself at the moment, because it was always then shunned to one side and said, oh, stop being silly. Or you'll be fine tomorrow, or
So how did you become good at expressing your emotions then, do you think? Where did that come from then? If you
I had to teach myself, really, that in every situation there's always a result, and you have to make that conscious decision of how you're going to use that experience, whether it's going to be negative or a positive way. And there are so many situations where an occurrence has happened, or a child has done something wrong. Oh, it's because they were brought up that way, and later on in life they do something really bad, but they were treated really bad as they were young, which is acceptable to some degree, but that individual has that decision to make. Well, I was treated like this when I was young. Does that mean then I have the excuse to treat others badly? But I don't think it should be that. It should really be, and then this is me, is that try and find the good in everything, because yes, what you're experiencing is painful and hurtful, but what am I going to do so that the next time this happens to someone else, I don't do what that person did to me to make them feel like I felt. And it's difficult. It really is difficult to take yourself away.
And you have to have that self-reflection piece, and you have to be able to be honest with yourself, and actually just take a moment to sit down and identify why you feel a certain way. Is it a behavior pattern or a coping mechanism from when you were young? Has this person actually really done anything that's that bad or to offend you? And you need to understand yourself better, I think, to be able to have empathy for other people.
Absolutely.
And to understand how you react to situations.
And I'm still learning every single day, now that I'm a father of two lovely boys. There are situations that I think when I was growing up, when I'm a dad, I'm not going to be like that. But then sometimes I hear my dad in me, and but that's just because we are a product of our upbringing, of our society, and I have to take a step away and say, oh, do you remember that time, Lowell, that you said you're not going to be like that? And you do. I find myself going into that situation, because kids will be kids. They drive you up the wall, but you have to kind of like step away. And I always say sorry to my kids if I upset them. They've been naughty. I shout at them, never smack them. Oh God, when I was younger, I got whipped.
Airbrush was out.
I think that was it. Slippers were out. That was it. But I've never smacked my kids, and I always said I never would. And that's the one thing I'm grateful for. I was smacked when I was a kid, when I was naughty. But I always apologize to my kids if I've shouted at them, because I think it's important to say sorry when you've hurt someone, regardless of what they've done. To say sorry, to say I didn't mean to hurt you, is a massive thing. Those 3 words, I am sorry, can mean so much to someone If you
Mm,
go and hurt someone, even if it's by accident, and don't say sorry, that person is scarred. That person sees you in a
mm,
different way, in
mm.
a different light.
I would add on to that as well, the reason why you reacted in the way that you did as well. So that I'm saying the words "I'm sorry" is incredibly important, because some people skirt around the apology thing and like,
Yeah,
well, the reason why, but the sorry piece needs to come first, but then also explain why you acted in that way and
correct.
how it
Yeah,
can change in the
yeah.
future is really important. So we talked about the family unit a little bit. Now talk about friendships. I'm always interested in friendship groups and best friends when it comes to men, because as women, quite often you always have like a best friend and you have like a girly friendship group, and we've got that like support mechanism and support network around us. I'll be interested to learn of your approach, or even what you've observed about the male approach to kind of friendships and friendship groups and how you support each other.
I think with and it is very much, a lads kind of situation when you've got a bunch of friends together.
Yeah.
Lads will be lads. And I've had friends who I've not friends with because they've changed over time, and that's quite sad. And it's quite sad because I see a lot of people who, I don't know, sometimes even choose their friends over their loved ones. And don't get me wrong, they have their own reasons too.
Mm,
But when
mm,
when you're, and I had a very, very close friend of mine who I thought would be my best friend for life, did everything together. But for whatever reason, we grew apart, and that really, really hurt me. To this day, it still cuts me up, because I think that that bond that you have when you're a man, and you grow up together, you see that on TV and movies, and you're like brothers for life.
yeah.
And I always thought that, and it just
Mm.
wasn't the case.
So just, if you're comfortable, explain a little
Yeah.
bit perhaps why you drifted apart from this friendship and how that
uh,
made you feel.
I personally think that it was because I kind of like was at that stage where I was ready to grow up, and not just go out partying every single weekend and drinking and all that. And I found my wife. My girlfriend, obviously at the time, and I wanted to spend a lot more time with that person, and less with my friends. So in a kind of way, yes, it was kind of like, I would say, my fault, but I mean, that's what happens in life, though, isn't it? And you'd expect your friends to just kind of like still be there and be around and support you, and
Oh,
but
that's such an interesting one, because I think a lot of us who have very, very close friends probably go through that different stages, particularly when we're finding our life partners,
yeah.
where you are going through that honeymoon period, which lasts about 2 years. Let's be real. And it's all like,
or
well,
less, or
okay,
less for some, I don't know.
and I think and it's something that I've had to learn, is that a friend, it's not a reflection on your friendship or a necessary reflection on how you feel about that friend or that person. It's just a moment when you're investing in your future. But I think
Yeah,
it's being on
exactly.
that side where I've been dropped,
Yeah.
for fun. I think if the conversation had been more open and we'd spoken about it, there wouldn't have been as much of an issue. I would have understood. And
Yeah.
and I think it's something that we don't talk about. I can imagine men talk about that even
Even
less.
less. Oh my God. It's not even, you know, you don't even talk about it. I mean, men are somewhat, I would say, a lot more forgiving to other men for small things. But when
Yeah.
it comes to, the code, the bro code,
Mm.
it's it's a lot more. No, who is this that's come between us?
Oh, yeah.
I was your boy first. I was your friend first. And and I do see it from their point of view as well. We were very close. I was his wingman, as you call them. And to then suddenly go, well, now I'm by myself, and it is challenging, it is hard. But like you said, if there was a conversation that we could have just had around that, that would have been probably resolved it. But I don't know, it might not have. I mean,
So
yeah.
how do you think then, and I think this is probably hypothetical because obviously you haven't had the opportunity to do that, or maybe you have had the opportunity to do that with somebody else, maybe a family member or another friend. How do you think that conversation could have taken place, or what would have made having that conversation with your friend easier, do you think, on both sides? What could you have done? What could he have done?
I could have maybe taken the time to just, pull him out to one side and actually say, look, what's going on, rather than reacting how I reacted and how then he reacted. But because men beat their chest and they never like to talk about their feelings, and especially when the other person is on the attack mode and doesn't want to listen, you're then put on the attack mode and you don't want to listen. Before you know it, what's meant to be like a harmonious conversation to try and build back our friendship suddenly becomes another big argument, and it just becomes a cycle, to the point where it becomes, is it too late now to even have that conversation? Too much has happened now to have that conversation. We are both now two different people. We're not like we were 10 years ago. That person is gone. I've changed. My beliefs and the way I live my life has changed to where I was, and that person might not understand that. And I think that's the difficult thing. But it's a difficult one, because if it was like a bit of a sliding door situation, it would have been very interesting to see how it would have gone, or even if we would still be friends, and I would have just gone off in a different path, and so would have he, if I hadn't met my wife today. Do you know what I mean? If that little moment in time where I didn't meet my wife and that didn't exist, would we still be friends? And what will that friendship be like now? Will it still be the same kind of, or will it be completely different and something worse? I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's
an interesting one, isn't it?
yeah.
I mean, have you, I don't want to say found a replacement because that sounds wrong, but have you found another relationship that is perhaps quite similar in like having that trust, having that banter, sharing time, spending time together? Have you managed to find that again with
I don't think I've ever found that again in another guy, because this is cliche, but my best friend is my wife. I mean, there's no one else I'd rather spend my time with. And it's funny because, like, you hear all these things, during the pandemic and the lockdown, and couples that were forced to kind of like be in the same room for like 12 hours on end.
Yeah.
And then me and the wife would turn around to each other and gone, we've never really had that issue. We've never really had that kind of, we're at each other because we spent so much time with each other. And I think it's because very much so we're yin and yang. We're complete opposites of each other. And I quite often say this, and when we have a few glasses of the vino, we often say, if we were put on these apps, these dating apps of what you like, what music you like, what religious background you're from.
No way you choose each other.
No way. I mean, she likes, house and techno. I'm an R&B kind of guy. I like, I like, chilling out. She likes going out. I mean, God, why would you ever put these two? It's a match made in hell, and but it's not, because then this is what I was saying. If you can understand where that person's coming from, and you find that actually I don't need another person who is me. I don't want to look in the mirror and date myself. I want somebody who's going to bring out the parts of me that I don't have. The ideas that she has. And I was very much very cynical about the whole tax situation. I'm sorry to bring this in, it's probably boring.
No, it's boring.
But when I was young, and I was always, because of a conversation, I can't remember where, but I always used to say, oh God, the tax man's coming along, he's come to take my money again. Oh great, tax man's here, he's taking, but then the wife turned around to me and said, well, if you think about it, if you didn't pay this tax and you had to go to the hospital tomorrow, Think about that and be like, how lucky we are that we can just walk into our local doctor and get a prescription, get the medication, go and see a professional. Whereas a lot of countries, especially in the Philippines, God, I mean, I think for a paracetamol, it's like £5 for one tablet for £5. And it's ridiculous. And so you're out there and you're like, whoa, okay. So, and things like that she just like enlightened me and made me see things a different way. I remember so well, and I'm a bit ashamed of this, but I remember, I thought it was a chewing gum or a wrapper or something, and I threw it on the floor waiting at the bus stop.
Yeah.
Being the the silly boy that I was.
Yeah.
She immediately picked it up and she said, don't do that, put it in the bin. And I said, why? You know, someone's going to, the usual lad. And then I thought to myself, that's the reason why you're going to be the mother of my child, because you're going to teach her the right things. You're going to teach them the right things to do, And she brought so much out of me that there's only positives. And again, it's like, have I found that friendship again? Yes, I have in a way, but even better, even more.
I think that's what relationships are about, whether it's friendships or romantic relationships, in that they should kind of add to our lives. They should help us to be the best version of ourselves and give us different points of view and teach us things that we don't know. As you said, we don't need copies of ourselves, and we're not going to grow as a human being or a person in that way. So I think that's really good that you highlighted that. I'm going to go back to the friendship piece though, because how difficult, I know what my perspective is on this, but I'd like to hear Mel's perspective. How difficult is it when you get to the kind of like married kids, or you get to that kind of like middle-aged, to make actual friends? How easy or difficult is that, and from your experience?
I think it is a lot more difficult because men, I don't know, I mean, men can be just as picky, sorry, forgive me for saying this, but just as picky as women are when it comes to friendship. Because they always say that men get on along with men, but they get on with other men a lot easier, I think. But whether or not it's a true friendship, that's another thing. Whether it's a deep-seated friendship, that's another thing. I found,
tell someone not your deepest, darkest secrets, but you go with something that is, quite deep, quite challenging, something that's bothering you. You have to have so much trust. Be vulnerable with that person.
I mean, I remember, my wife having a friend who we thought was a friend, and she ended up to be quite toxic. And I thought, but though she was so welcoming to this individual, and so nice and so lovely, and and I thought, what, that's nice, and we were welcomed, but she ended up being quite toxic to the relationship, to the outer friendship group as well, which then kind of like, you think, I'm questioning myself now on judgment, on a judgment basis, that did I read that completely wrong? Did I not see the telltale signs that they were not the right person for my life at my time? Because if my friends who have been friends for years don't like them, is that a telltale sign or something? But then you try not to second guess yourself, because you want to prove that you make the right decisions.
But I feel like everyone comes into your life to teach you a lesson, whatever that might be, right? So
that is true. That is very, very true.
Probably, or he probably, she
yeah,
she's probably taught you something, a skill or a lesson or something about yourself that you've taken on now. So I think we can never look at these things as like totally a waste of time or as toxic,
You're right, you are right, because I mean, you like I said earlier on, you've got to see what you can take away from that situation and make a positive out of it. Because if you continuously harness every bad and every single time that someone did bad to you, you then become this toxic person yourself. You've just got
like a Dorian Gray portrait in the attic, like beautiful on the outside,
correct,
festering away
exactly.
And I love that kind of analogy.
So
talking a little bit about the importance of being able to have empathy for your fellow human being, and then in order to cultivate, I guess, bonds authentic relationships requires vulnerability. And I think we talk about empathy and vulnerability a lot in our personal lives, but when it comes to business, there's a lot more stigma around what empathy means and how important and whether it's beneficial to actually show empathy. And sometimes it can be seen as a weakness by some. Why do you think the stigma needs to change? And if so, why?
Yeah, that stigma of, if you show kindness, it's seen as weakness, or if you say sorry to someone, that means that you're not strong inside, which, to be all honest, is absolute rubbish. It takes a hell of a lot more to say I'm sorry and put your hand up in business in front of a big group of people who are judging you than it is to just say, no, I was right all the time. It is, trust me, and sometimes it's even harder to do it on email, because they can't gauge your voice, they can't gauge your sincerity sometimes. And then a lot of the time, and I've made mistakes, I've made bad judgments, I've not read the brief correctly, and got the delivery date wrong, or missed out some sort of important item. And with that, it's got to be, you say, apologize and have empathy, because we are all human, we are all, we're not robots, but I think society tries to make us like robots, the processes that you've got to go through. But we've all got to be understand that, okay, it's fine, nobody, there's no catastrophe, what you've done can be fixed. I rather trust somebody, and I think I speak for a lot of people, I try to trust somebody who will outwardly say they've done something wrong at the start of when they've realized it, rather than later on down the line when it's a lot more difficult to fix. Because I completely understand that not everything, best laid plans, they always don't go to bloody plan. Something's going to go wrong, technology goes wrong, and if something's missed off, something, well, okay, great, fine, but how do we fix that, and how do you fix that together? Somebody who has done something wrong or hasn't brought something to the table, and you point the finger at them just because everybody else is pointing the finger at them, well, who's the strong one?
This is why I think, like, this is such a challenge for leaders, and this is something that leadership needs to address, whatever that way that is, through training, development, self-reflection, self-awareness, because it really does impact those that you're leading and impacts teams. And I think also becoming more aware and accepting that, as you said, we're not robots, we're human beings. We might have a role, we might have a job title where we're expected to deliver certain things, but our skill sets don't lie in absolutely everything. They can't lie in everything. That's just like ridiculous. So knowing our strengths and our weaknesses and being quite open about that means that we can then ask for help and seek support. And I'm not good at doing, like, I'm good organizer, but admin wise, we'd be like, I get a bit impatient and bored of that. But sometimes it's a big part of the event planning, and it was a big part of my job. But now, obviously, I work for myself. I'm like, right, do you know what? Not that great at that part. I'm going to openly admit it and ask for support. And if we're all more open to being vulnerable around our skills, strengths, and weaknesses, then we can actually all support each other more and actually push forward in a more cohesive way and get more done, be more innovative.
Absolutely. And also, as leaders, as you go up the hierarchy chain, I think it's also important and vital when you've got a team to always ask, do you need help? Because sometimes those individuals find it very difficult to ask for help because they don't want to be seen as weak. But as a good leader, you should be able to open up and say, guys, if you need help with anything at all, my door's always open. Have those open channels of communication. Have regular one-to-ones that you don't talk about work. You just talk about, how's your day? How are the kids? How's the family? What have you got planned? That's when you start breaking down those barriers and start getting to know the person and making that person feel comfortable with you, so that when they do need help, they're going to ask for it. you know.
And also, we never know what's going on behind closed doors, do
Yeah.
we? So somebody who might usually work or behave in a certain way, all sorts could be happening at home. And it's not about digging
Absolutely.
around into people's personal lives, but I think
Yeah.
we also need to be aware of that. And if you have that culture, as you're saying, that open
Absolutely.
culture where people feel they can come to whoever that person might be, who's in a leadership or HR role
Yep.
or whatever that is, you know, at least we can then start making adaptations, changes, or just have some understanding on why that person might not be on their game at that moment in time.
Exactly.
And some of us are so scared of being like, well, do you know what, actually I can't afford to pay my bills right now, actually shitting myself.
Yeah.
My focus is not at the moment on whether somebody wants, you know, chrysanthemums and their bloody flower, like flower arrangement on their table. I know it's my job, but I need to say perhaps why I'm not as excited at the moment or as working as quickly, because this is actually happening. So I don't know. I'm so for those soft skills in the workplace, around soft skills, which are more important than ever now, around, you know, being able to speak to people, being able to show vulnerability, empathy, creating inclusive environments, understanding how to communicate, have conversations, read body language, all that sort of stuff. I think so important as leaders. So what you notice is lacking in our industry, would you say, with regards to support for men in the industry? So, I mean, we talk about well-being and wellness, and it is for all. It's not aimed at women, for example, but some of the activities can feel a bit female orientated, perhaps to some men who aren't used to those sort of things. Is there a way that we can change that messaging, or different things that we can do, approaches that we can have, that will give more support to men in the events industry, which is one of the most stressful industries on the planet, and we expect our male leaders to be like, you know, always on it, never showing that vulnerability?
I think there needs to be a lot more inclusiveness with men having a network where they can actually speak to each other openly. Just because a lot of the time, you know, it's, you know, there needs to be forums where, as a certain level, let's say, what you say is not judged. You're not judged upon what you say. You know, if you're a CEO of a company, and you see this more and more now, where you've got CEOs going, I had a mental breakdown today. And you see so many people gathering round and saying, good on you, wonderful that you've come out with it. But why does it take for him to go on social media to announce to the world that he's got mental? Why can we not do this in a local forum where, do you know what, that probably won't be his only day that he has that, but he felt that day. What about the next time? Is he going to go out and say that again? And what sort of support is he getting after that, the aftercare of it? You know, and actually what you find is that you probably have conversations with other men who have been in the same situation, who then you could build that allyship with and be that friend that, do you know what, today I woke up in a really dark place. Oh, you've got 10 minutes for a quick chat. Yeah,
I feel like we always have, like, not always, but we have quite a lot of women's networks, women in events, or, you know, women working and things like that. And there isn't really that for
I think because there's always been that issue with the, you know, with the diversity at the top of not enough women, and that's quite right. There aren't enough women on senior board levels. But also as well, it's that worry, I think, that, oh, if we start concentrating on the men, that means we're taking away the attraction of this issue with females. Well, no, there is an issue there, but also let's not forget about the men on these levels, well, because it's stressful as well. And there are people on you know, C-suite levels that really do champion female, you know, female in power. And you know, I'm for one that always power love to see. It dumbfounds me that in this country it was only 60 years ago that women couldn't vote. Right. And I think we need to also understand that men can break down sometimes, that we, you know, the shoulder, you know, the world is sometimes feels like it's on our shoulders to carry, and there's an expectation of men to perform a certain way, to be a certain level, to have that I am strong and but sometimes when you close the door at night, God almighty, and you just flop and you just go, God, you know, and then do it all again tomorrow.
And I think there's this like piece that we're missing as perhaps women, in that we're seeking change, we're seeking equality, we're seeking all of these things, and we do have a lot of support from everybody to help facilitate that. But actually there's that additional support piece that if we supported men as well, we'd probably get what we want a lot quicker. And I don't mean to make a decision, I don't mean it like that, but I mean because then it brings everybody to a similar level of thinking and being and sharing. So we don't have to have these hierarchy kind of ways of behaving, which I think would level us out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you so much. And I try to, I had a conversation, I had, I say discussion, but I asked my kids the other day, guys, who's the head of the family? And they didn't quite get me. I was like, what are you talking about, Dad? I said, who's the head of the family? And they said, Mummy. And I said, no. I said, Daddy? I said, no. And I said, the cat? I said, definitely the cat.
Bob next door?
Yeah, as I said, and then they didn't quite get me. And I said, well, there is no head of the family because we're all as important as each other. You've got to understand the importance of that, that cogs are turning. And when one of those cogs don't turn, or they're not turning as fast as they should be, well, there's an issue there, and then we have to address those issues, and we have to make sure that all those cogs are working in harmony with each other. And when you've got that, your output is so much better. Your output is so much more fruitful. And by opening up this kind of barriers that we have of male being at the top, and it's kind of like it's
not serving anyone, is it? Essentially,
it's not. We're limiting that pool of experience and resource to just one gender, let's say. But I think there needs to be more conversations with men, and more networking just for men.
I love that. I love that idea, and I think that's definitely something that should happen. And I'm just thinking about two examples where you touched upon where people have come out and actually spoken, or men have come out and spoken about mental health issues or been vulnerable. And they're two different ends of the scale. And one was when the Monzo founder and CEO basically resigned. I was suffering hugely from my mental health, and there's actually a podcast where he talks about the fallout around that and the support that he was given, how he felt, how he got to that point. Really interested to hear the thought process, but also hear the positivity around how he was supported and how his role then was adapted. And then on the other side, you've got somebody, and I can't remember who the person was, but basically posted on LinkedIn, him very upset, kind of, I think he was crying, and talking about how he had to make people redundant, and people were, gunning him, say to him, they're like, this is all a bit fake, you're being like, on camera for the sake of it. Like, why you just, you're just in this for clout. Why you even the way you're presenting this is, it doesn't come across as genuine, and people really dragged him over that. So you're like, well, what are people supposed to do then? Because like, if you want to be honest, feel like, oh God, now I'm scared to, because I feel like people are going to be faking it. And then the other ones are too scared because I don't know how I'm going to be judged. I don't know. I don't have an answer really. That was just an example.
It's quite scary to put your vulnerability out there because of the worry of how you will be judged. Because how do you know if I'm being sincere or not? I mean, you don't know me, and again, we are a bit too quick to judge and to point the finger. So yeah.
I've got a question to finish off you with, and this no pressure here at all, because really the answer to this is it's a challenge. It's a challenge. If there was a male support / networking group, what activities do you think would need to happen within that group? What would you foresee? So say if you were going to set something up, you'd be like, right, we're all going to hang out together and do this and this. What would you suggest, or think would be something that's good to include?
I would probably... When was the last time that you cried? Because that's an important thing. Because crying is an emotion. It's a release of anxiety, of pain, of frustration, of burden. And when you cry, it sets off so many chemicals, and sometimes just get it out. You know, when
Mm,
was the last time that you shouted,
mm,
off the big, and just release all that stress?
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and, you know, what is it that, that you could change? If you had that magic wand, what is it that you would change that would
Mm,
make it all better if there was one thing that you could change? And
mm,
how can you make this magic wand? Is it possible to have this magic wand? Can you get to that point? And
mm,
sharing the best practices out there is so strong, because what
mm.
you'll find is that loads of people have been in your situation before,
Yeah.
and they probably have a coping mechanism that you know they've created over the years that works for them, and it might be a starting point for that individual to go, do you know what, it's
Mm.
not bad. That's not a bad, starting point for me. When
Yeah.
your day gets stressful, what do? How do you cope with it? Do you just go for a long walk? Do you go for a cycle?
Mm.
For
Like a fag.
a fag, or whatever it is? Or do you speak to people? Do you speak to your person? Do
Mm.
you need somebody to speak to who won't judge you? Sometimes speaking to a complete stranger is a lot easier than speaking to your friends,
God, yeah. Oh
because
God, yeah.
yeah,
Totally. Totally
you know
understood.
it's kind of like, because you don't know me, you won't necessarily judge me on the same level as my friends would,
Yeah.
or
Or
my
have this
family would.
preconceived notion because they can always relate things
Yeah,
back to something, whereas this person would just look at it objectively. But I really
exactly.
would envisage sort of seeing some sort of conversation where people can have a safe environment to
Yeah,
share. I've obviously have like sessions around people sharing their stories around vulnerability or experiences that they've gone through and the experiences that they're still in or have come out of. So everyone can
yeah,
see, as you said, we've probably all got similar things going on here, like
absolutely.
nothing to be ashamed of. And then practicing how to actually have conversations around this and how to share in vulnerability. So kind of teaching those skills
Yeah,
as well, I think.
yeah. I'd also like to see that where you leave your title at the door, whether you're
Yeah.
a CEO, whether you're an executive, whether you're an
Mm,
intern, leave your titles at the door, because
yeah,
here they
agree.
don't mean anything. We are just human beings. We're just, people here that have a pain inside that we need to release, whatever the pain that is, whatever that,
Mm,
anxiety is, whatever that difficulty that you're having inside. Leave your titles at the door, because we're just all
mm,
equal here. And that's where
mm,
then we start getting the inclusion part, that everybody has the right to be, everybody has a right to their own feelings, and no one here is allowed to judge on how you feel or what you said, but
mm.
understanding each other more and
Yeah.
listening. I think continuous listening is, I think, one of the big factors that we need to train ourselves to do.
Listening and self-reflection, I think, are the two pieces, and self-awareness, three pieces.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. I
No,
mean,
it's my
yeah, if
pleasure.
this like networking group happened, I would be all supportive of that. I think it's like a great idea. But thank you so much for your time and speaking to us quite honestly and openly about your experiences. And hopefully it's like resonate with some people, bring up some questions or
Hope so.
ideas. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.